In Vietnam, we had a problem identifying friends and identifying enemies. Let me assure you that everyone here is a friend. There are no enemies here. The reason why, I mean, these ladies and gentlemen, these experts that we brought in today, the reason why we brought them in is because we think they're legitimate, sincere individuals. Nobody's trying to make money off us. Nobody's trying to exploit us here. Otherwise, we, Vietnam veterans, wouldn't have invited them to our conference. This is our conference. This is your conference. So we're not bringing in any people who are winging it or trying to take advantage or exploit us. So let's just understand that we're all friends here, and everyone who's here is trying to help us.
To follow up on that, I hope that people recognize the focus is not only on the Vietnam vet. We don't see it as one individual's problem. Anytime there's a problem, it involves everyone in the family. And Dr. Science just talked about some problems that may be identified with children. Okay? There are also another group of people that we can call probably secondary victims, and that are the wives and female significant others. To talk on that, we have Dr. Aphrodite Matsakis. She's a Ph.D. Staff psychologist at the Washington, D.C. VA Medical Center, and is assigned to the Veterans Outreach Center in Silver Springs, Maryland. She's the author of a book on Vietnam wives, women and children surviving a life with veterans suffering from PTSD. I'd like to present to you Dr. Matsakis.
Thank you. I'm really honored to be here today. I've worked for the VA for 15 years. At that time, I saw Vietnam vets as well as other veterans. And there is post-traumatic stress among Korean vets, among World War II vets, and other kinds of veterans also. Right now, I'm at the Silver Spring Vet Center. I just got offered a job there, and I'm working more full-time with vets and their wives. But I got interested in Vietnam wives because the team leader at the Vet Center at Silver Spring came up to me and said, would you like to volunteer to do a women's group? Because some of the wives and girlfriends of the vets were accompanying their husbands or lovers to the Vet Center, and they were waiting in the halls, and they said, you know, we want a group too, but given the rules, you can't have a group without a professional. And Mr. Washington asked me to come, and I went, and I didn't know anything about anything. I didn't know anything about PTSD, I didn't know anything about Vietnam. And the women sat down and said, let me tell you, Aphrodite. And I started having nightmares. I went to the library and got all the books, and I sat and I listened and I listened and I listened, and I learned. What I heard was that the men were hurting and the women were hurting too. When I wanted to write an article on Vietnam wives some 5 or 6 years ago, I queried all the women's magazines, Ladies' Home Journal, all those. And I just got all rejections. And then I queried again after 6 months. And I talked to an agent in New York about this topic, and she said, Vietnam veterans, who cares about them? And their wives? I mean, really, where are you? This is before Platoon, before it was like popular to be a Vietnam vet. It was a lot of vets were still hiding their identity. So I think this sense of shame and stigma that was stuck on the veteran got also stuck on his wife and children. And the first wives that came in, this is not what I planned to say, but anyway, the first wives that came in, I was very impressed with them because I felt they were doing society's job. This was not just a problem of an unhappy marriage where the husband's a little withdrawn and the wife wants more affection. That's a common problem. There's something else going on. These women were staying up at night with flashbacks and nightmares. They were interceding for their husbands with the VA and other government institutions. They were trying to protect their husbands or their lovers from the misunderstanding of the other family members. Like, why won't Joe eat barbecue? You know, why doesn't he eat rice? Or whatever reminders of the Vietnam War would turn off or enrage their husband. They try to protect him from that. Some of the women felt totally shut out. Their husbands never talked about Vietnam. If I had to make one generality, And it's very hard to make generalities about Vietnam veterans or Vietnam wives. And I have to say that what I'm basing my remarks on is the people that come for help. This is not the whole population. I mean, obviously many vets have readjusted well, and some have suffered more than others. Some that came home got more rejection than others. Some came home to loving, supportive families or communities. Others came home and were greeted with balloons full of urine or your baby killer and all that. And others were simply ignored. And that's almost worse than being rejected. And I came home and nobody said anything. They acted like I never went. Have any of you read Laura Palmer's book, Shrapnel in the Heart? Right. Well, she talks about how parents prior to 5 years ago or 3 years ago felt they couldn't mourn their dead son because it was that war, because of the controversy surrounding the Vietnam War. So, let's see, where's my point? The women, the women that could come to the vet center, I can't say are representative of all the Vietnam wives and girlfriends in the United States. I'm talking about the women that were hurting enough that they came for help, or they felt they came for their husband or their boyfriend, seeing what they could do to help this man that they loved. Because often they had tried everything they knew, and the man was still suffering. And that's the bottom line. The one complaint they all had as women was they felt shut out of their boyfriend's or their lover's heart. That he was sort of involved with another woman, and this other woman was Vietnam. And she was much more important at times than the man's, than her. And some vets wouldn't share at all about Vietnam, but other husbands seemed to be obsessed about it. They had to see every Vietnam movie, go to every Vietnam parade. The house was full of Vietnam War vets. She had to cook for all these homeless guys, you know, and it was too much. I'd like to read something from the prologue. Well, let me start with this. I got this letter yesterday from my wife. She said, "It's way overdue that people are starting to talk about what it's like to be married to a Vietnam vet with PTSD. Most of us have never been able to discuss this with anybody. Just like the women in your book, I cannot cook anything Oriental, ask him anything about the battles, or tell him how much I hurt for him. Please keep writing about Vietnam wives. We need help. Sincerely, hurting for 18 years." Let me just say, too, that when I wrote this book, it wasn't just based on my experience at the vet center, but I did a survey of, I asked vet center counselors throughout the nation, what did they see as the major problems of the Vietnam wives? And I also looked at the literature of what we know about those who survived the Nazi Holocaust, because those people have post-traumatic stress disorder and other groups. So some of these things I'm going to be saying are going to be based on that. The women felt very grateful to have a place where they could share and be open, where they didn't have to explain everything to everyone. Just like the veteran felt betrayed by his society that did not give him the recognition that was due him, many wives felt betrayed also. They felt that they weren't getting any kind of help from the government. Often even their families were criticizing them for being with a Vietnam vet. Why don't you just leave him, or whatever. These are the kind of comments they got. Let me just read this. In many ways, the Vietnam veteran has borne the burden of our national shame, guilt, and confusion regarding the Vietnam War. You, as his wife, however, have borne society's burden for him. More often than not, it is you and no one else who has nursed your husband through his flashbacks and nightmares, through his depressions and suicidal episodes, and through his grieving. Usually it is you, and you alone, who have maintained your husband's will to live and have served as a buffer between him and the world. At times you have even served as a scapegoat for his anger towards himself, his anger towards the government, and his anger towards society. Often the veteran repressed his anger and experienced it as depression. Perhaps he tried to make it disappear by drowning it in alcohol or drugs, or becoming a workaholic. In some cases, he may have turned his fury on you and inflicted you with verbal or physical abuse, or both. Yet even when abused by your husband, you have often remained by his side, not only from fear, but from compassion, realizing that your husband's rejections of you and his explosions were not due to his individual personality, but due to the frustrations and stigmas imposed upon him by others. Intuitively, you have sensed that underneath your husband's abuse lay enormous amounts of self-hate and confusion. You have sacrificed much, yet despite your many sacrifices, you have been treated like a footnote. Outside of Vet Center programs, you have received no acknowledgement of your pain, anger, or anguish. In many cases, you have been as misunderstood and unsupported by your families and community as your husband, to the extent that your husband has been perceived as quote-unquote crazy. You have sometimes been perceived as quote-unquote crazy too, for staying with him, for loving him, and for helping him through his PTSD attacks. I'm now going to show you a video of some of these quote-unquote crazy women that was on the Today Show. There are two women from my group and a third woman who are talking about what it's like to be a Vietnam wife. Then the next part is 3 children of Vietnam vets. I need to say that the young man that's one of the children, who is very angry, as you will hear from his remarks, was a physically battered child, and that accounts for some of his anger. Once again, these people do not typify all Vietnam vet wives or kids. This was on the Today Show last Veterans Day.
Totally changed, and he had to divorce him. When he came home, it was like a different person, like part of him was still left there. Lydia's first husband died in Vietnam, and she stayed in this marriage in spite of episodes of violence and emotional abuse. He came home very angry. He didn't talk about Nam in the very beginning of our marriage. He would go away every weekend, and we'd be home with the 2 children to go to a place called Summer Valley where he'd kept out and all, and this went on for a long time. He's obsessed with Vietnam. He can't forget this war. He cannot forget this war now, and, we're the ones that are suffering now. Each of you has had episodes, flashbacks. There's certain things other than dates and anniversaries, obviously, but are there other events that trigger these very bad episodes? A helicopter. A helicopter. 4th of July. A car backfiring. The Battle Hymn of the Republic. The Stars Spangled Banner. America the Beautiful. American Grace. A John Wayne rally with guns in the background. And my husband had very bad flashbacks, and it didn't have to be a firecracker going off or anything. They would just come like that. And they're very hard to take because automatically he thinks that his family are the enemy and he'll go after us. I could be laying in bed and he'd have a flashback and start strangling me. It's very hard, but I know it's not him because of his eyes, the look on his face. It's another person doing this. It's not David. He doesn't know where he is. Because when he does come out of flashbacks, he is so sorry and cries. And it's very hard.
I think nightmares on the other side of flashbacks. The flashbacks, they're awake and they're physically active in it. In the nightmare, they're asleep. In our case, he's screaming in his sleep and he's thrashing the bed. He's actually fighting whatever's still inside of him from there. But my husband has expressed desires of suicide, and I believe it's a type of death wish. There are many vets that feel the men who didn't come home are much better off because they're not suffering. One of the lasting effects of a man who has seen so much death and so much agony is their retreat from intimacy. Now, we're the people in the world they're supposed to be the most intimate with. Intimacy is very different in this relationship. They're either very passionate or they're extremely cold, one of the two. And as a wife in the beginning, you think I know I used to think, well, maybe my mother didn't teach me, I didn't read the right book. Why do I always come across as the cold fish? And of course you could feel their anger if you're not responding properly. In his mind, which seemed irrational to me at the time, if I love you, if I really share my emotions and become intimate with you, you may die. And until I started group, I couldn't understand this. I just give up weighing. I don't have the right nightgown on, or my hair's not cut right, or I weigh too much, or I weigh too little, and you begin to really question your own self-esteem. I'd like to talk about the intensity, though. Maybe I ought to join group. Because, I mean, this is the first time that I felt that there was somewhere for me to go to talk about it, because I've kept it for such a very long time. But the intensity of the lovemaking, it's like overpowering. And sometimes you're frightened to say, I really don't want to tonight. I mean, because you don't know what the reaction will be. And if you need a little bit of space, they take it very personal, and they become very violent. I know that you made the decision to leave years ago before there was this awareness, but for the two of you, everyone must look at you when they began to hear what you're living with and say, I mean, why do you stay?
I could never leave him. I mean, he was my life, my children's father, even though he wasn't there for us most of the time. But he's there now, you know, and, you know, we worked hard, and it was a lot to go through, but it was well worth it. Now that it's all, you know, I mean, he's not completely there yet, and I don't think he ever will be. He'll never be the way he was.
And I think it's more than love. My life is a challenge, but had I been with Vietnam so long, I wouldn't know another way of life. And my only hope is that as each day passes and each month goes by, we can take some of the negative memories and just make them a little more positive. I don't think Vietnam will ever go away.
Tomorrow morning, Pat will be back to talk with some of the children.
Like they've been through a war themselves.
And I tried to love this man, but, you know, how can you love someone that everyone is telling you is a baby killer?
Anne's father and stepfather are Vietnam vets, and it was particularly difficult for her as an adolescent caught up in society's protest.
It's hard to understand how he can be in a really good mood and do everything for you, and then just not want to have anything to do with you.
Shannon is the child who talks her father through his violent flashbacks and tries to understand the behavior which hurts her.
I feel if your father fought in Vietnam and came back and you're to live with him, you're a Vietnam vet too.
David saw his dad abuse drugs and become violent, and he felt his emotional withdrawals. Therapy has helped both, but he has a lot of anger.
You have to put up with him. I mean, when the country doesn't have to live with him, you have to live with him. You have to see him every day. You have to put up with him when he goes on his rages, that his country actually made him into that raging person, and then you got to put up with him. I feel a victim of the war, yeah.
Your fathers are different than fathers who just have bad moods or difficult times, and we've all been through moody parents and difficult parents, but they're dealing with a specific kind of experience in their lives that has changed them forever.
When I was younger and trying to understand what Vietnam was, there was still a really bad stigma with with veterans. I couldn't really gain respect for him or gain an understanding because he wouldn't tell me what he had gone through. And the only thing I knew about Vietnam, of course, was what I had learned from newspapers or TV programs and things like that. So the society was trying to tell me that he was a really bad guy, a baby killer or murderer. And, what I saw of him, he was troubled.
It affected me in the same way it affected my father, because they would insult him, say things against him. It would make him upset. And when he's upset, it makes me upset.
The country, this country, I think, stinks the way they treated the Vietnam vets, because they didn't give them nothing. They just wow, you served in Vietnam, who cares? You didn't win the war, who needs you? Why don't you go in your little shell and just die? And I hate the country for doing that.
You must have felt many times during their childhood that you were fighting the Vietnam War.
They could snap at you and hit you 20 minutes later. Don't act like nothing happened. What, I hit you? I didn't know that. They're forgetful. They'll snap 1 minute and be fine the next. And act like nothing happened. Sometimes, just to protect him, I would threaten to destroy things of his because I know it will make him angry and he will hit me and I'll have him put in jail. And usually my mom, she can always talk me out of it. But, sometimes I think, it'd just be easier to have him put away for a while.
He'll go in a rage, yell at everybody, and just go off to sleep.
There's times when you really despise him so much, you hate him. If you actually had a gun in your hand, you'd probably pull the trigger. Because he's, they're too violent. I mean, I give my mom a lot of credit. She's little, and what she went through them first 13 years is unbelievable. Now I don't feel, you shouldn't shoot him the way he is, because I understand him better. But before, I always thought, just kill him. Get rid of him. Put him out of his misery.
The only times it's really scared me is when he upsets my mom. And she's had some pretty bad times when he'll just go and he'll go to sleep after upsetting her really badly. And I'll be there trying to calm her down before she, has to. I threatened to put her in an institution. She's just really had bad times, and he can't handle it, so he just goes to sleep.
It's not his fault. It's caused from Vietnam War and the flashbacks. And if he wasn't in Vietnam, he wouldn't have the problems. So, therefore, it's not his fault.
And when he has bad times, Shannon, you're often the person who talks him through it, aren't you?
Yeah. My brothers just get really upset and don't want to be around him when he's like that. And it upsets my mother a lot, so yeah, I usually am the one who helps him.
Seeing the abuse that your mothers have put up with and gone through, there must have been times when you wanted to say to her, get out of this marriage.
My mom, lets me know that she certainly thought of divorce, and he's thought of divorce too, because I know he loves her, but he knows that she goes through a lot with him.
I feel a lot of pain for her, but it's never gotten to the point where I wish she would just divorce him or leave him, because I know it's not his fault.
I feel everyone just left him. I mean, his country first, and then his wife and his children. So if a wife and children really should not leave, no matter how bad it gets.
To help the families of Vietnam veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, most veteran centers offer
we're going to make it no matter what type women. They're your heroines. But these are the problems that they have. The problem number one being dealing with their husband's numbing. This is a tendency to shut off emotionally, which happens to survivors of trauma. If anyone in this room has survived sexual assault or brutal physical assault, you will also have that numbing at times also. It's just tuning out the emotions. This is a mechanism that's absolutely necessary in facing a catastrophe or some horrible situation. You just tune out emotionally so that you can deal with the situation. The problem arises when that numbing response is carried over into situations where it's not needed. So the women complain that their husband can quote-unquote tune out and that he needs a lot of time to himself. Survivors of trauma do need a lot of quiet time. A lot of the men like to exercise a lot, or they like to spend time with their buddies or whatever, and the wife can feel left out and neglected and ignored, even though the veteran may not be intending to do that. That's how she perceives it. She may also feel that it's her fault. Women are raised to think that their husband's happiness and their husband's response to them depends on their behavior or their looks or their personality. So if they're not getting the attention that they want, they tend to feel guilty, like they're inadequate women. If some vets feel like failures, if they come because for one reason or other they don't feel adequate in their roles, these women also feel like failures because their husbands aren't happy. Yet they are not failures at all. The women that I've seen, not one has been on drugs or alcohol. They usually have one full-time job, if not more, not to mention another job at home. They deal with an incredible amount of stress on a daily basis, and they have still their ability to love and to forgive and to keep on trying. So the numbing tends to be the most difficult response the women have to deal with. Of course, that spills over into not only communication, but into the sex life. I can't get into sex now, but there is a chapter on sex, and a lot of people buy the book for that. But anyway, the lack of communication can stem from in the couples that I've seen, from the veteran trying to quote-unquote keep a lid on his anger or his pain so he'll just shut off because he doesn't want to open up. If he starts crying, the tears might never start. If he lets the anger out, he might explode. He tries to stuff it down. Of course, sometimes it does erupt. But he's trying to keep a lid on his feelings. At the same time, the wife, she's afraid of setting him off, of upsetting him. She knows her husband's unhappy. She doesn't want to push him any further. If it's a situation of family violence, she doesn't want to take a risk of getting hit. But that's not the main thing, the risk of family violence. Mainly, she doesn't want to depress or upset an already unhappy person. If her husband or boyfriend has talked about suicide, which is not an uncommon problem among Vietnam vets seeking help at vet centers, then she will be especially careful in what she says. But meanwhile, might be very admirable, but if she keeps her feelings to herself and is always stuffing her anger, then she's going to have problems. Whenever anger is repressed totally or a lot, there's going to be problems. So in our group, I try, one of the most difficult problems the women have is, how can I love him so much and be so furious at him at the same time? And it is perfectly possible to be very much in love with someone and also live it with them. Some of the ways the anger is expressed, the women that I've seen do not act it out. They don't go out with other men, or they don't act it out sexually. They turn it in on themselves. There's a lot of self-abuse. In the survey that I did, 1/5 of the wives are obese. That means 100 pounds overweight or double their ideal weight. And a lot of that eating is a way of swallowing anger. And we've had women with a number of psychosomatic symptoms and also with high blood pressure, heart problems, and a lot of that has to do with repressed anger. Some of these physical problems got better once they found a place where they could vent their anger. They're angry because their dream of love and marriage did not come true. That they have, they're angry at, they might be angry at their husbands, but they're primarily angry at themselves because they feel, if I did a better job, this family would be like the ones on TV, painless families with no problems that don't really exist. Or they feel very disappointed in themselves. That they felt they didn't live up to their own expectations of what a wife should be. They're also angry at the role overload. Even if you're not married to a Vietnam vet, even if you never went to Vietnam, if you're working and trying to do a good job at work and trying to be an active person in your family, you're on role overload. And these women especially feel on overload because in addition to their jobs and the kids and whatever, they also might be doing a lot of things for their husband. They might be calling the VA for appointments. They might be driving him to the VA. They're trying to intercede and get help from this agency or that agency. Some women also feel like even though they're married, that they're single parents because they do most of the physical and emotional care of the children. This does not mean, please do not misinterpret me, that veterans do not love their children or do not want to be active, caring fathers. And indeed, they are, but they might not be all the time. We know from studies of the survivors of the Nazi Holocaust that parents that went through those camps often do not have the psychic energy to parent. Parenting takes a lot of energy. It's an exhausting job. And if you've been through trauma, you've got less to give. You're often preoccupied with the past. You got your own depression, you got your own anxieties to deal with, and there's less to give to children. So the veteran might need to retreat from his children because of his post-traumatic stress disorder, or if he had traumatic experiences with kids in Vietnam. As I'm sure you all know, kids were used in that war, kids might have been booby-trapped, sometimes kids were the enemies, children were very much involved in everything there, and a vet might have had some very horrible experiences with kids there, and that might spill over into his relationships with his own children. Another problem that women talk about in group is they feel like they've lost their personalities, that they've been constantly responding to family crises, constantly taking care of the family needs, and they forgot who they were before they got married. They've lost sight of their own goals. I'm often asked, can wives get PTSD? If you really, I have to say that living with a veteran with post-traumatic stress disorder does not mean that the wife gets PTSD. First of all, not all cases of PTSD are alike. There's mild cases, moderate cases, severe cases. In some cases, the PTSD is so crippling the veteran can't work or he can't love. And after all, that's the definition of mental health. Can one love, play, or work? And if you can do those things, you're okay. So if the PTSD is really crippling, the man will be severely impaired in one or more of these areas. In some cases, the PTSD is cyclical. October seems to be a bad month because of the Tet Offensive. So a lot of guys really sink down that month. They get more depressed, they might drink more, they need to retreat more, and those are hard months for wives. And children also, not to mention the veteran. So to say, you can't make generalities about PTSD, so you can't say that wives get PTSD from the husbands. But there are some symptoms that the wives say they pick up. Number one, their sleep is disturbed. They're living with someone who has sleep disturbances. Often their sleep gets disturbed. Some women talk about getting nightmares, dreaming about being in Vietnam. They feel angry like their husbands do, and irritable. And the other one is numbing. I know when someone comes into my office and says, I don't care about him, I don't care about this, I don't care about sex, I don't care about whatever, you know they care very much. And a lot of women will come to groups saying, well, I don't care anymore, I don't care. They really care. And what's underneath that I don't care attitude is a lot of grieving that hasn't come out yet, and often a lot of anger. So the point of the groups at vet centers is a woman support group. Is to offer women a chance to talk about what's on their heart. And usually it's the man they love. And they want to find out, what can I do to help him? And what I try and stress is, you can do a lot, but you can't do it all. And it's up to the veteran to get help for himself. We use a slogan from Al-Anon. You didn't cause it, you can't control it, and you can't cure it. This goes with alcoholism. The wife of an alcoholic or the husband of an alcoholic didn't cause the other person to drink, can't control the drinking, and can't cure it. The same with post-traumatic stress disorder. No matter how loving and nurturing a woman is, she cannot heal her husband, even though she might put herself in that position. There's much she can do to be helpful. There's much she can do to be destructive. And another thing we look at in the group is how, do I put him down? Do I set him up? When am I passive-aggressive? When am I really being hostile and blaming it on him? We try to have the women take responsibility for the ways they might be destructive in their marriages and family life. But we also try and help the women see, well, what is the limit of what they can give and what they can't give, because they can't go under either. I'm going to stop now and take some questions. Yes? That was the Tet Offensive refers to one of the bloodiest battles in Vietnam. Sometimes the PTSD or the symptoms of PTSD are strongest on anniversary dates, like the anniversary of the death date of a buddy, or something like that. The same as if your father died. That time of the year, you're going to get sadder. It's that simple. Yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. Well, if you differentiate, because with post-traumatic stress disorder, first of all, there has to be a stressor, like war, and also there has to be re-experiencing of the stressor. In other words, the person is suffering is reliving the experience, either through nightmares or flashbacks or through intrusive thoughts. I have a patient now who drives a mail truck, and when he drives, he sees what he calls them gooks. That's a racist term, but he sees Orientals on the street before him. And he, on one side, and on the other side is the regular road. So he's reliving Vietnam. That's an excellent point, because the it's not just that those are traditional male behaviors, but that those traditional male behaviors are now sort of undergoing a change, in that with men's liberation and women's liberation, men are allowed to be more emotive, men are allowed to show love and tenderness, and to cry and all that. But a lot of Vietnam vets that, I mean, they're talking about the ones that come to the vet center, again, not everybody, are stuck back in the pre-women's lib days and men's lib days. And the military encourages the traditional sex roles. And so the men came back and the world had changed. So it is hard to distinguish, because a man withdrawing from a woman is a way to punish her, too. Oh, thanks. Yes. Well, there's two hands. It doesn't matter. I'm going to take this gentleman first.
I'm separated from my wife, but that has nothing to do with what you're talking about. In the ethnic breakdown, what is the percentage of the African-American female-male relationship separation and divorce compared to, say, the Italian, the German, the Polacks, or the Indians, or the Hispanics, or whatever other ethnic group that went overseas?
We don't have any information on that, but we do know that post-traumatic stress disorder is more prevalent and more severe among the blacks and the Hispanics, because they suffer from more than one stressor. They not only had the war, they had racism at home and racism in the military. And they've been more severely affected, and that we know. But I don't know about the marriage breakdown.
Because of the microfilming of the codes on the RE re-up, where a veteran may have an honorable discharge, and he's walking around here with his head up, and he went to the corporation for a job. They look at the microfilm and call him anti-social behavior, a psycho, and he gets rejected, and he go out home and take it out on his wife and his children, not because he had post-stress, because he can't find employment.
I think you got it. That's a very common dynamic, and what we're seeing here is people sometimes take out their frustrations on the ones they love the most. And some, not these women, but some of the other women come to the vet center not only for their husband, but because they're at the verge of hitting their kids. Because they're feeling, I'm so frustrated, I'm ready to pop, and they're ready to beat up on their kid, and they get scared to death that they might do it. So they come knocking on the vet center door. And there have been women, it's been a very touchy situation, that have been involved in child abuse. And you can't blame it on their husband, but it's just the sum accumulation of their frustration level, that they want to take it out on the kids. Often these women are also incest survivors, so they're dealing not only with their husband's problems, but their own.
I've been to the archives in Bayonne, New Jersey, before they destroyed the records. I've worked in the Veterans Administration. I've worked at the hospital at Cambridge, and I was privy on the night shift to look at everybody's records. I can go back to 1940-something. And seemed like to me, the veterans that came out of World War II had serious problems worse than what we had. They came home addicted and alcoholics from World War II and other social diseases.
Well, my specialty right now is I'm trying to focus the questions on the wives and kids.
So they brought these problems home to their families.
That's true, and there have been studies on World War II families showing some of these same problems. So this is nothing new. It's just that our society is recognizing it more and more. Yes, sir.
You say the majority of the Vietnam vets' wives...
They come for help.
You just said something about they were incestuous,
I didn't say...
Children that were beat up when they were younger. Does it seem to you that the veteran finds that type of woman thinking that maybe he can retrain himself, to help survive, because maybe he lost people in the bush?
Are you asking me, does it seem like Vietnam vets are married to incest survivors?
No. You say, it sounds like what you just said, the majority of the wives of Vietnam veterans either were abused as children, one form or another.
I didn't say that.
Oh, okay.
I said that in the groups that I've had, there's been a large percentage of women that were physically or sexually abused as children. But that's pretty rampant in our society, so I'm not surprised they're showing up. But sometimes it's been half and half, but usually there's a good percentage of abuse survivors among the females. Often that that's helpful in that the woman understands trauma.
See, the reason why I asked this question, my first wife and my girlfriend, I seem to wound up picking out some losers there. And as I grew older, I looked at the part there where maybe I was trying to grab some of the guys, you know, I could salvage them, which I found that I couldn't. Then I grabbed one of my equals here, right here. So that's how I looked at it. I mean, you know, that's why I asked this question.
Any other question? Yeah, the lady in green.
I have a question. I don't know if it's crazy, but do you have any differences between a wife meets her husband prior to Vietnam and then or after Vietnam? The differences in how they are.
I can only speak from my experience, but women that saw changes in their husband often have very vivid memories of how he was before, and in many times that's one of the reasons why they stay, because they have that memory and they hope that it'll come back. And I think there's a more significant amount of grieving in these women. It's just like if you had a little kid and then say at 10 something terrible happened and you see that child crippled either physically or emotionally. You're going to remember the healthy kid, and it's going to hurt more than if all you knew was the crippled child. So there's more pain, and some of these women were married before Vietnam. In fact, the two white women on there were, yeah. You're saying is a better chance the marriage can be saved if the couple was married before? It's hard for me to answer that question because each couple is so complicated. Often women stay in those situations because they have children and it's hard to change. Sometimes they might have a baseline from the past, but they also have a lot more hurt and anger too. It depends on how much the wife has been used as a scapegoat emotionally. That can be done. Yes, sir. Armies, ma'am. I can't see.
Did you bring any copies of your book?
I just brought my own. I'm not selling books here.
In the blue handout, there are
yes.
excerpts.
Well, there's an excerpt from the chapter on the numbing, which is the main problem. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Would you say the Vietnam War was the last of the ethics of this country?
The last of the ethics?
Yeah. The scruples and ethics of today.
In what sense do you mean that, sir?
Well, the military, like I spent almost 3 years in the infantry and 6 years in the Army, the ethics with the guys was outstanding, you know, like we were taught to open doors and things like that. And you mentioned about children. I have cuckoo kids, believe me. We do that, keeping the kids away from us up to one point, you know. But now, just about every infantryman can tell you, even as you're walking through villages, you got 10, 15 kids around you. You know, so there was a little bit with the kids, as far as I was concerned, you know, that you can't trust them. You know, I don't think it's the average Vietnam vet looks at his children that he thinks that he calm.
I didn't say the average Vietnam vet does that. I said some men that have PTSD or other readjustment problems in the war that have particularly gruesome experiences with kids might have to retreat. Or also, if a person is depressed about anything, they don't have the energy to take care of kids. Taking care of kids is a very demanding job.
Thank you.
Very. There's another hand back there.
What about these marriages, these breakups? Does it have to, what about, you know, they say no romance without finance?
You know, and a lot of post-traumatic stress is a very difficult thing to get from the government or the VA.
Right.
So for some of these marriages fall apart because they're economic.
The woman might get tired of being the sole support, or the veteran can only work part-time, or has to take off a lot of time due to his depression, or if he's an alcohol or drug abuser, that takes him off the job also. And the woman gets tired of being the strong one all the time. So some marriages break up over that also. On the other hand, there was one couple where the husband stayed home and did all the dishes and everything, and he was happy. He didn't have to deal with the world. He didn't have to deal with bosses. And she went out and worked, and they got along fine. They had a complete role reversal. And who's to judge? It worked out fine for them. I think my time's up. Thank you.